Welcome to Salvatore's Secret Theater. Today, a tale from my book of short stories. A macabre piece entitled Time and Time Again. Without further ado, let's begin. It was 12 o'clock midnight. It was at this time each night that she tucked herself into bed, making sure that she had brushed her teeth, prepared her next day's clothes, locked her door, fed her cat, and set all 3 of her alarms in the time before. She set the alarms so that she would wake up on time for work at 5 in the morning, since she lived alone on the 3rd floor studio apartment of the city. She peered at the clocks, each reading a shining red 12 o'clock, as she lay in her bed, settling in to sleep. She stared into the clocks blankly until each one changed simultaneously to 12:01. She then turned over on her side and, pulling her thin black comforter over herself, closed her eyes, beginning to drift off. Drowning out the distant sounds of the city beneath her, images and tones began washing over her mind. She found herself in that strange world between worlds she was often in before sleep. It wasn't unusual for her, as she frequently visited the space, meeting many of the pieces and parts of her mind she had neglected. At least, that's what a therapist had said. When she had asked him, he said it was healthy and that it would be helpful to her, so she accepted it. She allowed the many vivid images of her life and people to flow and move through her as she let herself fall deeper into the sleeping state. As she drifted to sleep, she experienced a long emptiness, but didn't feel as though she were resting. It was a deep darkness that she floated in, feeling wide awake. She took a deep breath and was returned back to the space in between of her mind. Something about it now, though, didn't sit right with her. She began tossing and turning. There was a particularly strange mental image which pierced into her mind, mixed with the visions of the dream world's beginning. She thought she recognized the image. It was a face, but it was veiled in a deep shadow. It lurked and leered, its eyes piercing, menacing red orbs. It felt, as she tried forcing herself to sleep again, that this shade wanted to touch her and attach itself to her. She tried to shut it out. A pressure built up in her head and chest. She felt her skin crawling with hundreds of worms. She was unable to move as her attention was fixed upon the nightmarish image. Its mouth was wide open and wailing. It became clear as she heard its scream filling her mind. The dark shade, the wraith-like horror, it was herself. "No," she gasped, awake. Goosebumps and chills ran through her body. Looking at her ceiling in the dark, she sat up, palming her eyes, and breathed heavily. The clock read 12:32. She decided she would get a glass of water to calm down before she went back to sleep. Walking the few steps to the kitchen gingerly, her eyes took their time to adjust. She pulled a glass from the cupboard, turning on the faucet. She filled the glass with running water and tried to relax. As she brought the glass to her mouth, she heard a bump, feeling something brush against her leg. She jolted, dropping the glass onto the floor and shattering it. Images of the red-eyed specter pierced through her mind, stifling her vision. She stumbled backwards, slipping in the water, sliced open her foot on the glass, and cracked her head into the wall corner, losing consciousness. There was nothing but an empty void in that dark unconsciousness. She did not know where she was. Slowly, though, she began feeling her body coming back to awareness. A weight seemed to press upon her chest as she struggled to breathe. She stirred to wake. She was unable to move, and she cringed at the throbbing pain in her head. As her eyes opened, she saw the set of bright eyes burning above her. The shadowed figure knelt upon her chest, wailing shrill cries, screaming at her. The ghoul took its grimy hands around her neck and began squeezing, choking her so that she was unable to breathe. She struggled in vain, unable to move, and lost consciousness once again. The last thing she saw was a set of red, piercing eyes. She woke, with tears and screams pouring from her. She held herself, breathing heavily. Her cat meowed from across the room. She sat up. She was in her bed. It seemed to have been a dream. She looked at the clocks. Each of their red shining faces read 12:30. She thought she had to have been sleeping for longer. Still, she felt goosebumps and chills, and the image of the red-eyed shade lingered in her mind. As she sat and watched the clocks shift from 12:30 to 12:31, she thought she must still be dreaming. She got up to see her kitchen and told herself to wake up. The kitchen was totally empty and clean, as if nothing had happened. She opened and closed the faucet, and everything seemed to be normal. Maybe she was awake. She took a deep breath and sighed as she walked back to her bed. Shrieking in horror, she looked at the bed and saw herself sleeping there. The clock ticked to 12:32. Fear welled up in her as she watched what appeared to be herself sleep. She shook herself, trying to wake. She began crying as she saw herself gasp, sit on the edge of the bed, and look at the clocks. She watched in horror as she got up, walking into the kitchen and retrieved a glass from the cabinet. The clocks ticked to 12:33. She yelled and screamed at herself as she followed, trying to get her attention, but she wouldn't hear. She pushed herself and watched helplessly as she was startled. The glass dropped and shattered, and she slipped and fell, slamming her head into the corner of the wall. What she did as she watched her limp, unconscious body laying in a small pool of blood on that kitchen floor is difficult for us to understand. She must have gone quite mad. If any of us were her, I'm sure there's no doubt we would as well. In what pieces of her mind remain, she is still there in that nightmare. She never sees the clock after 12:33. She awakens only to forget, drifting in between the two worlds, trapped by the visions, to repeat the horrors, time and time again. I hope you enjoyed this story. I know I did. Like and subscribe for more content. Leave a comment. That was Salvatore's Secret Theater Stories. New videos every week. Come back soon.